Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Come with me as we step into the deep dark forest of quarantine, and let us pray we see sunrise in the morning. Got part 2 of the incredible new exclusive series by my good friend Ed Smith. As ever, please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag Team Fear? And so, with that aside, let's get into tonight's story, entitled The Gugwe Siege of Red Oak, Oklahoma, Part 2, Hungry Visitors. Let's get straight into that. A week before Mr. Thompson met his demise, Mr. Tully, his wife and 3 teenage boys who resided on the southwest corner of Northwest 1st Street and Northwest Elm Street had an interesting encounter. You see, they have a kind of salvage yard in the middle of town, and while the neighbourhood is well kept, it is quite the statement of unusual living. The July night was a hot one. The lot consisted of a house with 3 bedrooms, a Quonset hut garage and workshop, a recreation vehicle, and about 22 cars and trucks in varying states of salvage condition. As well as, lots of parts in piles and assorted stuff. There were also about 30 mature trees on the lot. One man's trash is another man's garbage? Okay, well, I'm not much of a philosopher, but here is the story, that when you think about it, it's kind of scary. The night was a quiet one. The dogs, a 110-pound red-nosed pit bull named Ralph and a 100-pound white pit bull named Lily, are the family's pets and guard dogs of all the treasures in the yard. And they could freely move from outside to inside through the doggy door in the kitchen. The digital clock just turned 2 a.m. when Mr. Tully was awakened by a noise coming from the outside to the west of the house. He got up, stretched and looked around the room, and the dogs were asleep and on their backs as usual. And then he heard the noise again. And this time Lily rolled over and stood up, and Ralph was still out. Another noise of metal on metal, and Lily was out of the door. Mr. Tully went to the kitchen door and opened it and walked onto the porch and looked to the west of the house where the noises came from. He'd seen a dark figure move across the front of the old RV and move towards the garage. And Mr. Tully yelled, "Hey! What the hell are you doing on my property? You better go on and get out of here." No reply was heard, but Lily was barking up a storm. Then Ralph came barreling out of the door, and when he got to the garage, his voice joined Lily's. Mr. Tully stepped off the porch when he heard a thunderous growling howl, and this sound caused him to stop straight in his tracks. He heard what sounded like a dogfight erupt, and then Lily came running back past him and then into the house. Mr. Tully backed up and onto the porch and back into the house himself. He went to his gun safe and pulled his 12-gauge shotgun and loaded it with 00 buckshot. He returned to the kitchen when Ralph busted through the doggy door and was halfway through when he was violently pulled back through the door. He smelled a rotten urine and musky smell, and then Ralph let out a horrifying scream and then fell silent. He went to the door, opened it, and took 2 steps back when he was gripped with absolute fear. Standing there on his porch was a 7-foot-tall Gugwe, and with his dog Ralph in his left hand, lifeless. He raised his shotgun, and when the Gugwe jumped from the porch and ran to the east and around some of the cars and into the trees. Mr. Tully landed on the porch with his shotgun sounding off with 2 blasts. Lily came back onto the porch and was looking for Ralph and looked at Mr. Tully puzzled and confused. And just then his teenage boys came onto the porch and was hollering about what was going on. And he told them to get their guns and were going to go look around the property. One of them asked where Ralph was, and Mr. Tully announced that he was gone. "He is dead. Now get your guns." A search of the property turned up mostly nothing except for the spot that looked like a fight took place on the backside of the garage. When they returned to the house, his wife asked if he was going to call the police. He shook his head back and forth and then responded, "And tell them what?" Mr. Tully sat in his chair, and when the boys began to ask questions, all he could do was shake his head and stare into space. Meanwhile, back at Harley's farm, Harley and the farmhands Paco, Jim and Troy spent the night at the main house, and the night passed without an incident. He told his farmhands what happened in the woods when he finished. They were in disbelief and shock. He said that he would be calling the sheriff in the morning, and Harley told his farmhands not to venture outside unless you were armed and with each other. And I mean, all three of you, no one moves on this farm alone, he told them. They say ignorance is bliss, but this time ignorance is a reality with teeth. As the Hunter's search team walked out of the under-road culvert that passed underneath Highway 82, it was starting to get dark. With flashlights and spotlights glaring, the team continued walking in 2 to 3 feet of water in the streambed, and they passed by Baker's farm to the south. As they rounded the creek loop in the southwest of the lagoons, it was officially dark. The next 2 farms were abandoned, and no lights were visible from them. As they moved into the woods just south of the lagoons, they caught the smell of what they believed were the lagoons in the warm night air. A large splash erupted from behind them some 100 yards or so. They spun and lit up the area, and nothing was visible to them. Maybe a fish or raccoon, one of them suggested. They began walking down the creek again, and after 200 yards or so, the sound of a large tree falling to their right made all of them jump. The odour of the lagoon seemed to get stronger, and that's when they heard a growl from the left. It was deep, and had volume. Worst of all, it was close at some 100 feet. "What the hell was that?" one of them exclaimed. They probed the darkness with their lights and still could not see anything. Mason uttered, "I think we're being stalked, guys. I think I hear things moving around us." Kyle chimed in, "I have been feeling that too." Chris exclaimed, "Yep, me too." And just then they heard splashes behind them at 150 feet or so, like something ran across the creek. Brad, in a nervous voice, said, "Did you hear that? That sounded like something on 2 legs." And Kyle said, "Let's move up the creek." The group advanced up the creek about 100 yards when they heard something walking or trying to walk quietly in the water about 200 feet behind them. Kyle turned and with his spotlight lit up the area, and to his shock, there, walking, was a Gugwe trying to pace them. When the creature was illuminated, it roared and took several steps at them. Mason raised his shotgun, and just then, from the right flank, something ran up and knocked Kyle and Mason down in the water, and grabbed Chris, and then dragged him through the creek, up onto the bank of the creek. And while the rest of the group tried to get to their feet and gain some understanding of their situation. "What the fuck?" yelled Brad, and they heard Chris's terrifying screams for help as the Gugwe tore into his chest and bit into his right shoulder. The team's lights turned to where Chris's screams came from, and they saw the Gugwe crouched over Chris's body, attacking him. Chris, with his left hand, grabbed his hunting knife and stabbed the creature in the side of the abdomen. And the creature let out a screaming howl of its own. It smashed its right hand down onto Chris's forehead, and then snapped its teeth-lined muscular jaws around Chris's chin, right up to his eye orbits, and ripped about 65% of his face from his head. Chris screamed and began to make a gargling sound as his lungs filled with his blood from his chest wound and the trauma of his face being removed by the Gugwe, truly living up to its name, a face eater. Brad turned back to see where the pacing creature was, and it was gone. Mason and Kyle began firing at the Gugwe that claimed Chris, but it bounded off towards the woodline, and they ran to Chris while trying to help him with his injuries. He then began to convulse and died in some spasms of pure agony. They were horrified at the wounds inflicted upon him. Panic had now fully set in. Gary Callahan had just started to drive to work. He was employed over in Wilburton, Oklahoma, where he was a mechanical technician at the State University. He pulled into the Quick Mart at the corner of Northwest 2nd Street and Northwest Market Street to get some coffee and a breakfast sandwich to get his morning started. The clerk in the store made mention of some kind of commotion over at the police station yesterday morning, but Gary was still waking up and didn't pay much of any attention to her. He paid for his stuff and then walked out. He started his F-150 Ford that had a toolbox with an 80-gallon fuel tank that he had previously filled the night before. He pulled out onto State Highway 270 westbound when his headlights crossed a figure of what looked like a person, but it looked bigger than a person, maybe some 9 feet tall. Big guy, he thought to himself. The figure was walking on the railroad tracks to the south of the highway it paralleled. He was just starting to speed up on the highway when the figure began running at his truck, crossing the bar ditch between the tracks and the road very quickly. Gary could not believe that some fool would be running in that manner at him. The truck was easily travelling about 45 miles per hour when the figure stepped onto the highway and Gary started to get a good look at this thing. "Oh shit!" exclaimed Gary. And when the figure jumped into the back of his truck, the truck lunged sideways under the weight of the creature. The Gugwe smashed the back window out of the single-cab truck and grabbed Gary's chest as he struggled to keep the truck on the road and fight the creature. The Gugwe dug and tore with his 2-inch claws into Gary's chest and ripped across the whole of his thorax. The pain was tremendous and the truck swerved, and Gary's foot punched the gas pedal and the truck lunged forward. As the truck left the roadway, it hit the ditch and the front tire dug into the soft dirt. The rear of the truck snapped up off the ground and the body of the truck flipped in mid-air, and the Gugwe was thrown about 130 feet, and there it landed with a thud and rolled about 40 feet. It immediately sprang to its feet and then ran across the road and disappeared back into the creek. The truck had landed on the 5 telecom cabinets that were lined up on the highway right of way. The truck's in-bed fuel tank exploded, and since the truck had knocked open the doors, when it landed on these cabinets, it gave the fire a clear shot straight to all the electronics. The resulting fire and secondary explosion of the truck's built-in tank knocked out the landline communication and internet connection to the fiber loop. This was the main interconnect for the fiber lines coming from the surrounding cell towers. This also handled the digital radio interconnects for the police, fire, city hall radio comms. This one accident knocked out all communication for the town and surrounding area, including a large portion of the county radio connects for the sheriff department. Communications blackout was now in effect, at least involuntary. That would change once out-of-town authorities had arrived. Fear heightens the sense, even as you're being eviscerated. Kyle grabbed his phone shortly after Chris passed away. "Shit, no fucking service. What the fuck? Hey, anyone got any service or anything?" Brad and Mason said no and shook their heads. "We have to get moving, guys," Mason whispered. "Look, we have to get Chris back," Brad said. No, we have to get the hell out of here. Carrying Chris will slow us down," Kyle said. "Fuck that. We have to get him out of here," Brad yelled. "Look, I don't like it either, but Chris, he's dead. He's gone, guys. If we don't get out of here, no one will know this happened," Mason stated with a very matter-of-fact tone. "Hey, we need to walk up the east side of the lagoons and get on Cemetery Road so we can follow it back into town," Mason said, as the others looked at him with disgust. "I know, it's a shitty thing to do, but we have to survive to tell the others what happened here," Mason continued. All right, let's go," Kyle said. The three of them moved up the dirt road between the tree-lined fence row and the edge of the lagoon. They were halfway up the road when they noticed a figure standing in the middle of the dirt road ahead of them, a tall figure about 150 feet away. It was at this moment that Brad heard a noise from behind them, and there was another huge figure behind them. Kyle said, "Oh man, this isn't good. Brad, you cover that one behind us. Kyle, the one to the front. I'll watch this tree line," Mason said, just as the Gugwe dropped out of the treetop above them. As it landed about 5 feet in front of him, he managed to utter the word "shit" out of his throat as the beast slashed his neck, shredding his vocal cords, arteries and muscle as blood spurted across Kyle's face. He stumbled back onto his feet when the Gugwe sank its teeth into Mason's chest. Brad turned to see the attack. He heard bone crack when it bit into Mason's chest. Kyle began shooting into the air with his pump shotgun, just to try and get this thing to back up and get some distance. The Gugwe tore flesh and bone from Mason's chest. Then it knocked Brad down and jumped into the lagoon as it swam away into the darkness. Mason then fell to his knees and then fell on his face, where he convulsed from his heart attack brought on by the attack and fear itself, and his last breath disturbed the dust rolling up around his head. Kyle tried to aid Mason while keeping an eye on the creature up in front of them. Brad began firing at the shadow behind them, and it bounded off into the darkness of the tree line. "Brad, let's go!" screamed Kyle. Both of them ran towards the creature standing to their front and firing everything they had at the fucking thing. When it took off and ran towards the cemetery, they lost track of it and kept running. The boys then ran down the dike of the lagoon and made it to the paved perimeter road that ran around the cemetery. They were almost to the front gate of the cemetery when a rock about 5 inches in size struck Kyle's knee and shattered it. Kyle screamed in pain and fell, and with writhing pain, Brad helped Kyle back to his feet and helped him on his injured side. They both heard the sound of running footsteps coming from behind them. They both turned, and when the Gugwe leaped on them, knocking the wind out of Brad, and Kyle couldn't stay standing as he was on the ground when the creature fell upon him and bit his right arm off, just above the elbow. Blood then gushed and spurted from the arteries severed, and flesh flung and hung from his arm as he held up the stub of where his arm used to be. Kyle screamed once more as the Gugwe grabbed his leg and dragged him off into the darkness of the cemetery. "Brad, get the fuck out of here now! Go! Oh, Brad, oh, for God's sake, go! Tell the boys I love them! Tell them!" A few seconds afterwards, he heard Kyle's voice. "Oh, God, help! Fuck, help me!" As the beast ripped into Kyle's abdominal cavity, pulling out his liver, intestines, and stomach. "Please! Oh, God!" And then silence, when the viciousness of the beast ended Kyle's life by reaching up into his chest and pulling out his heart and lungs through the already open abdominal cavity. Brad bolted. He ran as fast as he could north of the Lagoon Road and into the intersection of Lagoon Road and Southeast Oak Street. He then turned left, and there were homes along this street and some streetlights. He felt a little less scared, but he still didn't know where these fucking things were. He slowed his pace a little, and all the while trying to listen for any noise that might tell him where these things were waiting. The strange thing is, there were no dogs barking. And there were always dogs barking. This was very, very odd. He walked up to the 24-hour clinic at Southeast Oak Street and Southeast 2nd Street, and there was always a medical receptionist and a physician's assistant on the duty. And when he got to the front door, he noticed that the front door had been shattered and a computer was on the floor that actually sat on a reception desk. Inside, the lights were flickering and some were simply broken. He pulled his pistol. Why he picked this time to do it was a mystery to him. His shotgun was somewhere back on the Lagoon Road. He opened the door with the broken glass slowly and stepped in, being as quiet as possible. No sound, nothing. He moved down the hallway when something, a noise or movement, caught his attention. Moving towards where the sound came from, he found a cell phone with the alarm going off. Switching off the alarm and looking to see if it had service. Of course, it didn't. And that's when the sound of something metal hit the floor. And this almost made him piss his pants, and Brad pointed his pistol to the front of his walking path down the hallway to his left. It was dark with no lights. He felt around for the flashlight that it usually had on his hip, and was amazed that it was still there. He pulled it and switched it on, and progressed slowly down the hallway, moving carefully and quietly as he could. He got to the last door on the left of the hallway, and it was partially open. There seemed to be some noise, however, it was faint. He slowly pushed the door open, and when he did this, his flashlight fell onto the body of a receptionist that appeared to have been fed upon. He searched the room for anything else, and nothing was present. He scanned the room with his flashlight once more as it moved across the window, which had been broken out. The Gugwe's head and shoulders were framed in the window. Brad screamed and fired his pistol 3 times. The rounds of the .45 caliber Ruger struck the Gugwe in the upper chest and cheek. It roared and quickly turned and ran from the building and back in between some of the other buildings and into the tree line. He heard footsteps on the flat roof of the clinic. Oh crap, there was one on the roof. he thought. Brad walked out of the room and back down the hall, and from the same direction he entered, he had passed the roof access stair steps earlier, and when he approached he saw a shadow of a figure moving back and forth on the roof as the shadow struck the floor. "Fuck, this thing is going to come down here," he said to himself. "Well, okay, this is it." He raised his pistol with his right arm and while moving a flashlight with his left hand to light up the opening. Hey, who's down there?" a female voice said. "It's Brad Wilson. Who's up there?" A head, with auburn hair in complete disarray, peeked over the edge of the opening, and she climbed down the stairs and hugged Brad. "Thank you for rescuing me." "Well, I'm not a rescue party, just trying to make it back to the police station," Brad explained. "Are there any more of those things around here?" Brad asked. There were two, a smaller one and a really big one. You shot the smaller one. I was on the roof and seen it run away. The larger one, I don't know where it is," she spoke in a very shallow voice. "I'm sorry. My name is Carol Montgomery. I'm the physician's assistant here." "We need to get out of here. Do you have any weapons or anything you can use for one?" Brad asked while still trying to catch his breath. She picked up an intravenous bag stand, kicked off the roll around the base and then removed the bag bracket and held it like a samurai warrior. Brad smiled and said, "That's first-class thinking, girl." "All right, let's go," he said with determination. They began walking down the dimly lit hallway with some of the lights flickering. As they crossed an intersection of another hallway, Brad noticed something that caught his eye. On the floor at the other end of the hall, it looked like a cell phone going off, but on silent mode. He moved crossing the intersection of hallway, and as they moved, Carol was behind Brad and she was moving across the intersection when she saw it. The Gugwe was standing down at the other end of the crossing hallway, at about 130 feet, and it was slouched over, because a 9-foot Gugwe doesn't fit too well in an 8-foot hallway. She screamed, and Brad was about 12 feet down the hall looking towards the phone, and then he turned when he heard the scream. He saw Carol standing there screaming when the Gugwe entered the intersection and grabbed her. While still screaming, she began to punch the creature and kick it. It saw Brad approaching it and stepped towards him with Carol in tow. Brad jumped forward to try and free Carol from its grip, and the creature took its hand, yes, hand, doubled it into a fist, and punched Brad in the shoulder. And he heard his clavicle or collarbone snap and felt his shoulder dislocate. He flew backwards, landing onto his back and sliding about 20 feet away. As he struggled to regain his footing, his right arm was now hanging useless, and he picked up his pistol from the floor. The beast grabbed Carol's head, and Brad screamed, "No!" while she was still fighting for her life. The beast twisted it to the right and then re-gripped it and twisted it once more. Now, Carol's head was, well, sitting backwards on her shoulders, and she was silent now. Then the beast looked at Brad, who was yelling at this time and was approaching the creature again with a pistol aimed. The beast grabbed Carol's head and ripped it from her body. Blood spurted, ligaments snapped, and pieces of flesh were shredded from her neck. And then it threw her decapitated head at him, striking him in the abdomen, doubling him over like a big gut punch. Brad struggled to comprehend the display of vicious brutality. He had no words. The beast appeared to be smiling at him, as if to say, "Look at what I can do." He raised his left hand that held the pistol, and the creature roared. Brad fired the remaining 6 shots right at the beast's head, and all 6 made their mark, striking its cheek, snout, and neck. The beast grabbed its head and moved at him, and with a quick step, hitting like 350-pound linebacker, he spun and hit the wall, and then found himself on the floor. As the creature ran down the hallway and busted out the double doors leading to the outside of the clinic. Brad laid there on the floor for about 5 minutes, trying to regain his bearings about what had just happened. He saw his pistol behind him on the floor and struggled to regain it. The magazine was empty, but he ejected it and with his left arm found the last one and snapped it into the weapon. Recharged the slide by holding it with the right hand and painfully completing the procedure. Then he noticed Carol's head laying across the hall. With his staring look, as if the night wasn't fucked up enough, he had to see her lip quiver as the last of her nerve activity faded. When he got to his feet, the clock on the wall said 4:55 a.m. He looked up and, raising his pistol with his left arm, and began walking down the hallway towards the front desk. His right arm throbbed. He tripped on a purse when he kicked it, and as he passed the desk and some car keys fell out of it. Bending over, he put his pistol on the floor and picked up the keys with the little finger of his left hand, then picked up his pistol and stood up and walked out to the front door. Once outside, he looked around checking to see if any of these pieces of shit were still out there. It seemed to be clear. Brad managed to press the unlock button on the key fob and noticed the tail lights of the white Chevy truck blink. He waited to move for another 2 minutes and then proceeded to the truck. He got in and locked the doors and took a breath and managed to put the key into ignition with his left hand, started the engine, shifted it with his left arm, and then backed out, slammed it into drive and sped away towards the police station. Chief Jennings walked out of his office. "What the hell is up with the internet and the phones?" he asked the dispatcher, Mrs. Kelly. "I'm not sure. There was some kind of a wreck down on the highway, and one of the firemen drove by and came in and told me about it." "Well, how did the fire department know about it?" the chief asked. "Well, someone drove to the fire department and told them," Mrs. Kelly squawked. "I can't get diddly but squirt out of the radios. I have no idea where anyone is, Chief. 911 is down too. We're dead in the water here," she said in a frustrated voice. Let me try from my handheld," the chief said. "Well, that crap won't work either. You see, they have all of our radios routed through one trunk. I think that's what they called it. So everything can be recorded," Mrs. Kelly said, shaking her head once more. "I hate this digital crap," she grimaced. "Call them on the cell phones," said the chief. "No go, they're all down too, Chief," she said. "Well, what does work around here?" he grumbled. "My lighter, and I'm gonna go have a smoke," she said with disdain, as she lit a cigarette up underneath the no smoking sign. Wow. Absolutely chest-pounding, nail-biting, suspenseful story there. I absolutely love the slow creeper suspenseful build-up to a carnage. Absolutely wonderfully written there, Ed. Thank you so much, Ed, for bringing this one to the channel. Very, very honoured to cover your work. As ever, guys and girls, you know the drill. Please do let us know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag Team Fear? If you haven't subscribed to DMT for us to fear, where have you been? What are you waiting for? Smash that subscribe button and why not throat punch the notification bell to stay up to date with all DMT community and video posts. I hope that one wasn't too shabby, guys. As I say, I've got a double tooth infection, so I can hardly speak. It's like having a jaw wired at the moment. My throat's raw as hell as well. But I love you guys, and I hope this brings a little escape from the chaos that's ensuing around the globe. And above all, guys, as ever, remember, be safe, not sorry.